I worked in a secret Antarctic base. The being frozen beneath the ice whispered God's last warning. Before we start, I need you to do something for me. Right now. Comment below and tell me where you're listening to this. Your bedroom? Your car on the way to work? Late at night with headphones on? I don't care where, just tell me. Because if I disappear tomorrow, if this video gets scrubbed from the internet, if my name suddenly stops existing in any database you can find, I want to know that at least somebody, somewhere, heard what I'm about to tell you. I want proof that I existed, that I was here, that I tried to warn you all before it was too late. So go ahead, drop that comment, I'll wait. My name is Daniel Garrett. I'm 34 years old. 6 months ago, I was working at a secret research facility in Antarctica. And no, I'm not talking about one of those public science stations you see on documentaries where they study penguins and ice cores. I'm talking about a facility that doesn't exist on any map. A place with a budget that comes from programs so black, even Congress doesn't know about them. A place where 15 people lived and worked 200 feet below the ice, and where something has been frozen for longer than human civilization has existed. I saw it with my own eyes. I heard its voice inside my head. And what it told me changed everything I thought I knew about God, about humanity, about why we're really here. Here's the thing I need you to understand right up front. I'm not crazy. I'm not some conspiracy theorist who lives in his mom's basement connecting dots on a corkboard with red string. I was a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I have an honorable discharge and a security clearance that was top secret SCI before all of this happened. I'm telling you this because when I start explaining what I saw down there, your first instinct is going to be to dismiss me. To think I lost my mind in the isolation, that the cold got to me, that I'm making this up for views or attention or whatever. But I need you to push past that instinct and actually listen, because what I'm about to tell you is real, and it's happening right now. I signed documents, stacks of them, non-disclosure agreements that basically said if I ever talked about what happened at that base, I could be prosecuted under the Espionage Act, which, if you don't know, can mean life in prison, or worse. There's a clause in there, buried in legal language most people wouldn't catch, that essentially gives them permission to make me disappear if they deem me a national security threat. I've read those papers 100 times since I got back. I know exactly what I'm risking by making this recording, but here's the thing. In the last 3 months, I've been watching the news. I've been tracking seismic activity reports, unexplained weather patterns, strange phenomena happening in remote areas all over the world. And I recognize the signs. I know what's coming, so I've made my choice. You need to understand something about me before we go any further. I don't believe in God, haven't for a long time. I stopped believing the day I held a 6-year-old Afghan girl in my arms while she bled out from shrapnel wounds. A bomb that was meant for me hit her instead. I remember her eyes, the way she looked at me like I could save her, like I was some kind of hero. I couldn't do anything but watch her die. I was 26 years old. I'd been raised Catholic, went to church every Sunday as a kid, the whole thing. But after that day in Kabul, I couldn't pretend anymore. If God was real, if he was watching, if he gave a damn about any of us, that little girl would still be alive. So I stopped praying, stopped pretending. I came back from Afghanistan with a hole where my faith used to be. But what I found in Antarctica, what I discovered frozen beneath 2 miles of ice, it didn't restore my faith. If anything, it confirmed my worst suspicions. Because I found proof, actual, physical, undeniable proof that God is real, or at least he was, past tense. See, here's the thing nobody wants to hear. God existed, he created us, he set all of this in motion. Angels were real, heaven might have been real, all of it, but somewhere along the way, he gave up on us. He looked at what we'd become and he just left. Abandoned ship, and the beings he left behind, the ones who were supposed to watch over us, they've been going insane for the last 2,000 years, trapped, alone, waiting for a father who's never coming back. One of those beings is waking up right now. And when it does, when it finally breaks free from the ice that's held it prisoner for millennia, it won't be bringing salvation. It'll be bringing the rage of an abandoned child, who finally stopped waiting. The thing I saw, the entity frozen in that chamber, it told me things, it showed me things. And before I managed to escape that base, before they tried to bury the whole operation and everyone who knew about it, I learned the truth. The real truth, not the sanitized version they feed us in churches and temples. The actual horrifying reality of why we're alone out here in the universe, why prayers go unanswered, why good people suffer while monsters thrive. So that's what this is. This is my testimony, my confession, my warning. I'm going to tell you everything, every detail I can remember. The things I saw, the things I heard, the things that voice whispered to me in the dark while I was 2 miles beneath the Antarctic ice. I'm going to tell you about the base, about the people who worked there, about what we found and what it cost us. And I'm going to tell you what's coming, because it is coming. The signs are already here for anyone who knows what to look for. And by the time you realize I was telling the truth, it's going to be too late to do anything about it. So listen carefully, remember what I'm about to tell you, and when things start to fall apart, when the world starts to realize that something is fundamentally wrong with reality itself, you'll understand why. You'll know that someone tried to warn you, even if I'm not around anymore to say I told you so. Look, I need to back up a bit, tell you who I was before all of this, because you need to understand that I wasn't some naive kid who'd believe anything. I wasn't looking for answers or meaning or some spiritual revelation. I was the exact opposite. I joined the Marines right out of high school. 18 years old, thought I was invincible, thought I was going to see the world and be a hero. My recruiter showed me videos of guys jumping out of helicopters and kicking down doors, and I ate it up. Signed on the dotted line without a second thought. Boot camp at Paris Island nearly broke me, but I made it through. Got assigned to infantry. By the time I was 21, I was on my first deployment to Helmand Province, Afghanistan. That was 2011. The war was still hot. We were losing guys every week. I did 2 tours, 2 full deployments, 13 months the first time, 11 the second. I saw combat. Real combat, not the sanitized version you see in movies where the good guys always win and nobody really suffers. I'm talking about firefights that lasted 6 hours in 120-degree heat, IEDs that turned armored vehicles into coffins, friends who were laughing with you at breakfast and dead by lunch. I watched a guy I went through boot camp with step on a pressure plate. There wasn't enough left of him to send home in a full casket. I carried that with me. All of us did. You don't come back from that unchanged. The Marine Corps teaches you to bury it, to lock it away, to stay mission-focused. But it doesn't go anywhere. It just sits inside you, rotting. The thing that broke me, the thing that killed whatever faith I had left, happened during my second tour. We were running a patrol through a village outside Kabul. Standard stuff. We'd done it 100 times. Talk to the locals, gather intel, show presence. There was a marketplace, kids running around, women buying vegetables. It felt almost normal, almost peaceful. Then one of our interpreters spotted a guy acting suspicious near a parked car. My squad leader called it in. We started moving people away from the area. That's when I saw her, this little girl, maybe 6 years old, in a bright yellow dress. She was just standing there, looking confused, not understanding why the Americans were yelling. I started running toward her. I was maybe 10 feet away when the car bomb went off. The blast wave hit me like a truck, threw me backwards. My ears were ringing so loud I couldn't hear anything else. I couldn't see through the dust and smoke. When it cleared enough, I found myself on the ground, and she was right next to me, that little girl in the yellow dress, except the dress wasn't yellow anymore. She was torn apart. Shrapnel had ripped through her like she was made of paper. And somehow, impossibly, she was still alive, still conscious. She was looking at me with these huge brown eyes, and she was trying to say something, but blood was coming out of her mouth. I picked her up. I held her. I put pressure on the wounds, even though I knew it was useless. There was too much damage. She died in my arms 30 seconds later. Just stopped breathing, stopped being a person and became a body. Here's what really messed me up about it. That bomb was meant for us, for me and my squad. If we hadn't started clearing people away, if I hadn't run toward her, the blast would have caught us instead. She died because I was there, because we were there. And I remember thinking in that moment, covered in her blood, where the hell was God? If he's up there watching, if he's in control, if he gives a single damn about innocent people, why did he let that happen? Why did a 6-year-old girl have to be ripped apart by a bomb meant for soldiers who signed up for this? I prayed that day. First time in months. I begged God to tell me why, to give me some reason, some explanation that would make it make sense. I got nothing, just silence. Just the sound of my own voice in my head, bouncing around in the emptiness where my faith used to be. I came home 3 months later, honorable discharge. They gave me medals and thanked me for my service and sent me back to a country I didn't recognize anymore. Everything felt wrong, too quiet, too safe, too normal. I couldn't sleep more than 2 hours without waking up in a cold sweat, seeing that little girl's face. Couldn't handle crowds. Couldn't handle loud noises. The VA diagnosed me with PTSD and gave me pills that made me feel like I was underwater. I tried to work normal jobs, retail, security, construction. Couldn't keep any of them. I'd have a panic attack in the middle of a shift, or I'd snap at a customer, or I'd just stop showing up because getting out of bed felt impossible. My savings ran out. Started maxing out credit cards just to eat. My girlfriend left. My friends stopped calling. By the time I was 33, I was living in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew, surviving on ramen and whatever odd jobs I could pick up. I was broken, completely broken. Financially, mentally, spiritually, every way a person can be broken. I'd wake up some mornings and think about just not doing it anymore, just ending it. The only thing that stopped me was spite. Stubborn, stupid spite. Some part of me refused to give the universe the satisfaction. So I kept dragging myself through each day, barely holding on, waiting for something to change. I wasn't praying anymore, wasn't asking God for help. I'd already accepted that if he existed, he didn't care about me, about any of us. We were on our own. And honestly, that made more sense than any religious explanation I'd ever heard. The world made a lot more sense when you stopped expecting some cosmic father figure to show up and make things right. That's where I was when the email came. No warning, no context, just showed up in my inbox one Tuesday morning. Sender was a generic government domain. Subject line said, "Employment opportunity, specialized personnel required." I almost deleted it, thought it was spam. But something made me open it. Maybe curiosity, maybe desperation. The email was short, said they were looking for individuals with specific military experience and active security clearances for a research support position in a remote location. 6-month contract, all expenses paid. Compensation $180,000 for the full term. I read that number 3 times, $180,000. That was more money than I'd made in the last 4 years combined. It was enough to fix everything, pay off my debts, get a fresh start, get my life back. The email had a link to schedule a video interview. I clicked it before I could talk myself out of it, because here's the truth. I was desperate. I was drowning. And when you're drowning, you don't ask questions about the hand pulling you out of the water. You just grab on and hold tight. The interview happened 2 days later. I got an automated email with a link and a specific time, 2 p.m. exactly. The email said I needed to be alone, in a quiet room, with a stable internet connection. It also said the call would be encrypted and that I should not record it or allow anyone else to be present. Already weird, right? But I'd done enough classified work in the Marines to recognize the language. This was government, black budget government, the kind of thing where they don't tell you what you're doing until you're already doing it. I set up my laptop in my apartment, closed the blinds, and clicked the link at exactly 2 p.m. The video call connected immediately. No waiting room, no ringing. Just straight to a screen showing 2 people sitting in what looked like a completely nondescript office. Grey walls, no windows, no pictures or decorations, nothing that would identify where they were. The 2 people were a man and a woman, both probably in their 40s, both wearing business casual clothes that looked like they came from the same government-issued catalogue. The man did most of the talking. He introduced himself as Mr. Richardson, didn't give a first name. Didn't say what agency he worked for. The woman never said a word the entire interview, just sat there taking notes on a tablet. Mr. Richardson asked me basic questions at first, confirmed my service record, asked about my security clearance, asked if I had any family members who would need to know my location for the next 6 months. When I said no, something changed in his expression, like I'd just passed a test I didn't know I was taking. Then he got to the actual offer. He said they were staffing a research facility in an extremely remote location. He emphasized extremely remote in a way that made it clear he wasn't talking about Alaska or Montana. He said the position was for facility maintenance and security support. My job would be to keep the infrastructure running, assist the research team with any physical labor they needed, and maintain operational security. 6-month contract, no days off. No communication with the outside world except for one monitored phone call per month. All food, housing, and equipment provided. And the compensation was $180,000 for the full term, paid in one lump sum at the end of the contract, provided I completed it successfully and maintained my non-disclosure obligations. I remember staring at the screen, trying to process that number. $180,000 for 6 months of work. That was $30,000 a month. That was more than I'd made in an entire year at any point in my life. I asked the obvious question, what's the catch? Mr. Richardson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said there were several catches. First, I would not know the exact location until I was already in transit. Second, I would have no contact with anyone outside the facility during my contract. Third, I would be required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements that would remain in effect for the rest of my life. Fourth, if I violated those agreements, the consequences would be severe. He didn't elaborate on what severe meant, but the way he said it made my skin crawl. And fifth, once I accepted the position and began travel, I could not change my mind. There was no quitting. No backing out. 6 months, start to finish, no exceptions. He asked if I understood. I said I did. Then he asked if I had any questions. I had about 1,000, but I knew none of them would get answered, so I just asked one. Is it dangerous? He thought about that for a moment. Then he said, not if you follow the rules. The next step happened fast. Within 24 hours, I received an email with a date and time to report to a specific address in Virginia. That was in 5 days. The email included a list of what I could bring, which wasn't much. Personal clothes, toiletries, any prescription medications. No electronics, except what they would provide. No cameras, no recording devices of any kind. No weapons. Everything else would be supplied. The email also included the first round of paperwork. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was over 100 pages. Standard employment contract, medical clearance forms, background check authorization, and NDAs. So many NDAs. Non-disclosure agreements covering everything from the location of the facility, to the nature of the work, to the identities of other personnel. Each one more threatening than the last. Phrases like subject to prosecution under the Espionage Act and criminal penalties up to and including life imprisonment showed up a lot. There was even a clause about how if I died during the contract, my body might not be returned to my family if doing so would compromise operational security. I read that line 3 times. They were saying they might not even give my corpse back if something went wrong. I should have walked away. Any sane person would have read those documents and realized this was insane. But here's the thing, I wasn't sane. Not really. I was desperate and broken and so far past caring about my own safety that the idea of disappearing for 6 months actually sounded appealing. No bills, no responsibilities, no waking up every day in that miserable apartment wondering what the point of any of it was. And the money. God, the money. $180,000 could change my entire life. I could pay off everything I owed. I could get a decent place to live. I could start over, actually start over, not just keep limping along, waiting to collapse. So I signed. I signed every single page. Initial here, signature there, date this, acknowledge that. My hand was cramping by the time I finished. I scanned everything and sent it back. 2 hours later, I got a confirmation email. Report to the Virginia address in 5 days. Bring only what's on the approved list. Tell no one where you're going. See you soon. I spent those 5 days getting rid of most of what I owned, threw out trash, donated clothes, sold my car for basically nothing, paid what I could on my credit cards, which wasn't much, called my landlord and told him I'd be gone for a while, paid 3 months rent up front to keep the place. He didn't ask questions. I didn't volunteer information. The night before I left, I sat in my empty apartment and thought about what I was doing. Flying blind into some mysterious government job in a location I wouldn't know until I got there. Signing away my rights, agreeing to be cut off from the world for half a year, all for money. But it wasn't just the money. If I'm being honest with myself, if I'm really being honest, I wanted to disappear. I wanted to stop being Daniel Garrett, the washed-up Marine with PTSD and no future. I wanted to be nobody for a while, to go somewhere so remote that my past couldn't follow me. And maybe, somewhere in the back of my mind, I hoped I wouldn't come back, that whatever I was getting into would just finish the job that Afghanistan started. The next morning, I took an Uber to the address in Virginia. It was an unmarked office building in an industrial park. No signs, no logos, just a street number. I walked in with my single backpack and was met by a man in a suit who checked my ID against a list, then walked me to a conference room. There were 4 other people there. 3 men, 1 woman. All of us around the same age, all of us with that same look in our eyes. That look of people who had nothing left to lose. Nobody talked. We sat there in silence until Mr. Richardson walked in with a stack of folders. He handed each of us a folder with our name on it. Inside was a plane ticket, an itinerary, and 1 final document to sign. This one was short, just a single page. It said that I understood I was entering a classified program, that I accepted all associated risks, and that I waived any right to legal action against the government or its contractors for any reason. I signed it. We all signed. Mr. Richardson collected the documents, looked at each of us and said, "Welcome to Project Sentinel. Your flight leaves in 2 hours." That was the first time I heard that name. Project Sentinel. I had no idea what it meant, but I was about to find out. The journey to the facility took 3 days, and I still couldn't tell you the exact route we took. They planned it that way. Deliberately disorienting. We started on a commercial flight from Dulles to Chicago. Normal passenger plane, normal people around us. Then we got off, walked through the terminal and boarded a completely different aircraft in a restricted area most travelers never see. This one was military, no markings, no identification numbers visible anywhere. Just grey metal and uncomfortable seats. There were maybe a dozen people on board besides our group. Nobody talked, nobody made eye contact. We flew for what felt like 8 hours, but I couldn't be sure because they made us surrender our watches and phones before boarding. No way to track time, no windows to see where we were going, just the constant drone of engines and recycled air. When we landed, we were somewhere cold. I could feel it the moment the cargo door opened. Bitter, dry, cold, that burned your lungs when you breathed, but I couldn't see anything. They rushed us into a hangar, then into another building, then onto another plane. This one was even more stripped down. Cargo webbing for seats. The whole thing vibrated like it was going to shake apart. We flew for maybe another 6 hours. My sense of time was completely gone by then. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. My mind kept racing, wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. The other 4 people from Virginia were still with me. We'd been deliberately kept separate from whoever else was on these flights. Finally, one of them, a guy who looked like he'd been special forces based on the tattoos I could see on his neck, leaned over and whispered, "Antarctica, has to be. Feel how cold it is, and we've been flying south the whole time." I nodded. I'd been thinking the same thing. The 3rd plane landed hard, really hard, like the pilot was trying to put it down on ice and just barely made it. When they opened the doors this time, the cold hit me like a physical force. I'm talking -40, -50 degrees. Even inside the insulated hangar we'd landed in, I could see my breath forming ice crystals in the air. They gave us extreme cold weather gear. parkas rated for Antarctic conditions, face masks, goggles, gloves so thick you could barely move your fingers. Then they loaded us onto a tracked vehicle, something like a tank without weapons, and we drove. I still couldn't see outside. No windows in the passenger compartment, just metal walls and the sound of treads crunching over ice. We drove for maybe an hour, then we stopped. The door opened, and I got my first look at what would be my home for the next 6 months. It didn't look like much from the outside. The entrance was just a reinforced steel door built into the side of what looked like a small hill of ice and snow. But that hill was artificial. I could see the edges where it had been constructed, designed to hide what was underneath. There was a flag outside, whipping in the wind, American flag. At least that answered one question. 2 people in heavy parkas were waiting for us. They didn't introduce themselves, just gestured for us to follow. We went through the door into an airlock, then another door, then down a corridor that sloped gently downward. The walls were metal and concrete, industrial looking, with pipes and conduits running along the ceiling. Lights every 10 feet, security cameras in every corner. After about 50 yards, the corridor opened into a larger room. This was the main entrance to the actual facility, and that's when I realized how big this place really was. Amundsen 7th, that's what they called it. Officially, it was a climate research station. That's what the paperwork said. That's what you'd find if you somehow knew to look for it in declassified budget documents. A small American research outpost studying ice cores and atmospheric conditions in one of the most remote parts of Antarctica. But that was bullshit. The facility went down, way down. 4 levels deep into the ice, each level connected by reinforced stairwells and a cargo elevator that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. The top level, where we entered, was living quarters and common areas. Mess hall, rec room, dormitories, medical bay. It was surprisingly modern, clean, temperature controlled, almost comfortable. They gave us a quick orientation, showed us where everything was, explained the basic rules. Stay in authorized areas, follow the schedule. Don't ask questions about work that isn't yours. Meals at set times, lights out at 2200 hours, emergency procedures in case of fire, system failure or medical crisis. Standard stuff. There were 15 of us total at the facility. 5 were researchers, PhDs in fields I didn't fully understand. Geology, physics, something called xenobiology, which I'd never even heard of before. 3 were technical staff, engineers who kept the systems running. 2 were medical personnel, a doctor and a nurse. And then there were 5 of us who'd been recruited the way I had, support staff, security and maintenance. The researchers mostly kept to themselves. They were there to work and they took it seriously. 12 14-hour days down in the lower levels. The technical staff were friendlier. They'd been there longer, some of them on their 2nd or 3rd rotation. They knew how things worked, the unspoken rules. One of them, a guy named Harris, who maintained the electrical systems, told me straight up on my 2nd day, "Do your job, don't snoop around, and the 6 months will fly by. Start asking questions or poking into things that aren't your business, and it'll be the longest 6 months of your life." I asked him what he meant. He just shook his head and walked away. My job was exactly what they'd advertised: maintenance. I spent my days checking backup generators, clearing ice from ventilation shafts, repairing equipment when it broke. It was boring, mind-numbingly boring, but boring was fine. Boring was safe. I fell into a routine. Wake up at 0600, breakfast at 0630, work detail from 0700 to 1800 with a break for lunch. Dinner, maybe watch a movie in the rec room or read a book. Bed, repeat. The days blurred together. I stopped thinking about what I'd left behind. Stopped wondering what was happening in the world outside. There was no news, no internet, no communication except for that one monthly phone call. And even that was monitored and limited to 5 minutes. I called my landlord the first month just to make sure the apartment was still there. Didn't have anyone else to call. The isolation should have bothered me, but honestly, it was almost peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't drowning. I was just existing, going through motions. And that was enough. But there was something wrong. I felt it from the beginning, even if I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and people stop talking? When you can tell there's something happening that you're not part of. It was like that, but all the time. The researchers would disappear for hours into the lower levels and come back looking exhausted, drained, sometimes shaken. I'd see them in the mess hall, and they'd be staring at their food like they forgot how to eat. One of them, Dr. Petrov, this Russian geologist who'd been there for 8 months already, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. Grey skin, bags under his eyes so dark they looked like bruises. He barely slept. I'd see him at 0300 in the morning, sitting in the rec room just staring at the wall, and there were the locked areas. Every facility has them. Restricted zones for sensitive equipment or hazardous materials, but this was different. Sub-level 4, the entire floor, reinforced doors with biometric locks, security cameras pointing at those doors from 3 different angles, and a schedule. I noticed it in my second week. The researchers went down there on a rotation, never more than 3 at a time, never for less than 4 hours. And when they came back up, they looked terrified. The weird stuff started small. Little things you could almost convince yourself you were imagining. Week 3, I was doing a routine check on the backup generators on level 2 when the lights flickered. Not a full outage, just a quick dimming, like something had pulled a massive amount of power all at once. I radioed Harris, the electrical guy, asked if we had a power surge. He was quiet for a second, then said everything looked normal on his end. Told me not to worry about it, but his voice sounded off, tight, like he was forcing himself to sound calm. The lights flickered again that night during dinner, and again 2 days later. Always brief, always without any technical explanation. I started keeping track. It happened every time the researchers were down on sub-level 4, every single time. That couldn't be coincidence. I mentioned it to one of the other maintenance guys, former Army named Rodriguez. He just gave me this look and said, "Yeah, I noticed that too." Don't ask me what it means because I don't want to know. Dr. Petrov was falling apart. I'm not exaggerating. The man looked like he was dying. He'd been at the facility longer than anyone except the base commander, some Air Force colonel named Bradshaw, who mostly stayed in his office and avoided everyone. Petrov had been there for 8 months when I arrived, and whatever he'd seen or done in that time had hollowed him out. He never ate more than a few bites at meals. His hands shook constantly. He'd be sitting in the rec room and just stare into space for 20-30 minutes at a time. Once I walked past him in the corridor, and he was standing completely still, facing the wall, whispering something in Russian. I asked if he was okay. He turned and looked at me, and I swear to God his eyes were just gone. Empty, like nobody was home anymore. He said, "It dreams, you know, even frozen, even sleeping. It never stops dreaming." Then he walked away. I stood there trying to process what the hell he'd just said. It dreams. What dreams? What was he talking about? The sounds started in week 4. I was in my bunk, trying to sleep, when I heard it for the first time. A low sound coming from somewhere below. At first I thought it was the ventilation system. These old facilities, they make noise. Pipes expanding and contracting, air moving through ducts, but this was different. It was rhythmic, steady, like breathing, deep, slow breathing. The kind of breathing something very large would make. I lay there in the dark, listening, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the more I listened, the more sure I became. That was not a mechanical sound. That was organic. Something alive, something huge, breathing somewhere deep beneath the ice. I got out of bed, pressed my ear against the floor. The sound was clearer, definitely coming from below, from sub-level 4, or maybe even deeper. I don't know how long I stood there listening. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been an hour. Eventually it stopped, just faded away into silence. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The breathing sound came back 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Always at night, always when most people were asleep. I asked Rodriguez if he'd heard it. He said no, but his face said otherwise. He'd heard it. He just didn't want to talk about it. I tried asking one of the technical staff, a woman named Chen who ran the HVAC systems. She actually laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. Said old buildings make weird noises and I should stop being paranoid. But then she leaned in close and whispered, "Don't go poking around, seriously. Just do your 6 months and leave." Everyone knew something. Everyone was pretending they didn't. And the more people avoided my questions, the more convinced I became that whatever was happening on sub-level 4, it was big, bigger than a classified research project, bigger than anything that should exist 2 miles under Antarctic ice. Then there were the conversations that would stop the moment I walked into a room. I'd come into the mess hall, and 3 researchers would be huddled at a table, talking in low, urgent voices, and the second they saw me, they'd go silent, just stop mid-sentence and stare at their trays until I got my food and left. Or I'd be walking past the rec room and hear raised voices, an argument, and when I stepped in to see what was happening, everyone would suddenly be very interested in whatever was on TV. It happened over and over. I wasn't imagining it. They were actively excluding the support staff from something, keeping us in the dark. And the thing is, in a normal job, I wouldn't have cared. But we were trapped in a facility under the ice in Antarctica with no way out and no communication with the outside world. When people start acting secretive in a situation like that, your survival instincts start screaming. Carter was one of the security guys. Ex-Navy, probably late 30s, had that look of someone who'd seen some serious shit and wasn't impressed anymore. He kept to himself mostly, did his job, didn't socialize much, but he drank. There was a small stash of alcohol at the facility, supposedly for special occasions, but Carter had his own supply. Where he got it, I don't know. He'd drink alone in his quarters most nights. I found him one evening in week 6, drunk off his ass in the corridor near the dormitories. He was leaning against the wall, bottle in hand, staring at nothing. I asked if he was all right. He looked at me with bloodshot eyes and started laughing. Not a happy laugh, a broken laugh. He said, "You really don't know, do you? You really have no idea what you signed up for." I said I didn't know what he was talking about. He took another drink, then grabbed my shoulder and pulled me close. His breath reeked of whiskey. He said, "You don't want to know what's down there, Danny. I'm serious. You don't want to know. Do your job, count your days, and go home rich. That's the deal. That's the only way this works. You start asking questions, you start digging, and you're going to wish you'd never heard of this place." I asked him what was on sub-level 4. He let go of me and slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. He stared at the bottle in his hands for a long time. Then he said, "Something that should have stayed buried. Something that's going to wake up eventually no matter what we do. And when it does, God help us all." He passed out about 30 seconds later. I stood there looking at him, my heart pounding. Something that should have stayed buried. Something that's going to wake up. What the hell did that mean? I thought about waking him up, demanding answers, but I knew he wouldn't talk. He'd said too much already. I left him there and went back to my bunk, but I couldn't stop thinking about his words. God help us all. Carter didn't seem like the religious type. What could scare a guy like that badly enough to start praying? The nightmares started that same week. I'd never been much of a dreamer. Even with the PTSD, I usually just didn't sleep well, but I didn't have vivid dreams. These were different. Every night, the same image. I'm standing in a massive dark space, can't see the walls or ceiling, just darkness stretching forever. And in that darkness, something is moving, something enormous. I can't see it clearly, just shapes, but I can see wings. Huge black wings, spreading out so far I can't see where they end. And the wings are wrong, tattered, broken, like they've been damaged and healed wrong over and over again. The thing attached to the wings, I can never see it fully, just glimpses. A hand that's too long, a face that's almost human but not quite, eyes that are completely black, like holes in reality. And it's looking at me, watching me, every night, the same dream, those wings spreading, those eyes staring. And a feeling of such overwhelming sadness and rage that I'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat, my heart trying to break out of my chest. I started dreading sleep, started staying up as late as I could, drinking coffee until my hands shook, anything to avoid closing my eyes and seeing those wings again. But it didn't matter. Eventually, exhaustion would drag me under, and the wings would be waiting. The alarm cut through my sleep like a knife at 4:37 in the morning. Not the regular wake-up alarm. This was different. Loud, harsh, repeating in short bursts. Emergency alarm. I was out of my bunk before I was fully awake, muscle memory from the Marines kicking in. People were already in the hallway, pulling on clothes, looking confused and scared. Over the intercom, Colonel Bradshaw's voice, trying to stay calm, but you could hear the tension underneath. All personnel remain calm. We have a situation on sub-level 4. Emergency response team report to the command center immediately. Everyone else stay in your quarters until further notice. Sub-level 4. Of course it was sub-level 4. My stomach dropped. I'd been at the facility for almost 2 months, and I'd never heard that alarm before. Whatever was happening down there, it was bad. I started heading back to my bunk like we'd been told, but Rodriguez grabbed my arm. He was already dressed, moving fast. He said they were calling for anyone with rescue or emergency training. That meant us, the former military guys. I followed him to the command center, which was really just a larger room on level 1, with monitors and communication equipment. Bradshaw was there, along with Dr. Petrov, who looked even worse than usual, and 2 of the technical staff. Bradshaw saw us come in and didn't waste time. He said there'd been an incident during a routine ice drilling operation on sub-level 4. Part of the tunnel had collapsed. 3 researchers were trapped down there. Communication was cut off. They needed to get down there fast to assess the situation and get those people out. He looked directly at me, Rodriguez, and Carter, who'd just arrived. He said, "You 3 have combat rescue experience. You're going down. Harris and Chen will go with you to handle any technical issues. Gear up and move in 5 minutes." We geared up fast. Heavy cold weather clothing, even though we were inside, because apparently sub-level 4 was kept much colder than the rest of the facility. Nobody had mentioned that before. Helmets with lights, ropes, first aid kits, radios. Carter was stone-faced, moving on autopilot. Rodriguez looked nervous, but focused. I was running on adrenaline, not really thinking, just doing. We took the cargo elevator down. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3, and then Level 4. The elevator slowed and stopped. The doors opened, and immediately I knew something was wrong. The temperature, it hit me like jumping into ice water. We were already in Antarctica, already in a climate-controlled facility, but this was different. This was cold that didn't make sense, cold that felt wrong. Not just physically cold, it was like the cold had weight, had presence. I could feel it pressing against my skin, even through the insulated gear. The corridor on sub-level 4 looked different from the upper levels. The walls were still reinforced metal and concrete, but there was ice. Actual ice forming on the surfaces, despite the heating systems that should have prevented that. Our breath came out in thick clouds. The lighting was dimmer down here, more shadows, and it was quiet, too quiet. You'd think in an emergency with people trapped there'd be noise, movement, something, but it was silent, except for our footsteps and breathing. We moved down the corridor toward the main security door. That's when I got my first real look at the entrance to the restricted area. 3 separate security systems, biometric scanner, keypad, and a manual wheel lock like you'd see on a bank vault. Harris stepped forward with an authorization code from Bradshaw. The locks disengaged one by one, heavy metallic sounds that echoed down the corridor. The door was thick, had to be 6 inches of reinforced steel. What the hell were they keeping down here that needed that level of security? Harris pulled the door open and we moved through. On the other side was another corridor, but this one sloped downward at maybe a 15-degree angle. And it wasn't metal and concrete anymore. It was ice. They'd carved this tunnel directly into the glacier. The walls, the ceiling, all ice. Thick support beams had been installed every few meters to prevent collapse, and there was lighting rigged along one side, but this wasn't a permanent structure. This was an excavation. We started down. With each step, it got colder. I don't mean a little colder, I mean exponentially colder, like we were descending into some kind of frozen hell. My face hurt. My hands hurt, even inside the gloves. I could feel ice crystals forming in my nose when I breathed. Rodriguez was swearing under his breath in Spanish. Carter hadn't said a word since we entered the tunnel. We went down maybe 50 meters, then 100. The slope was gradual but steady. We had to be way below the facility now, way below anything that should exist. Chen was monitoring her equipment, some kind of atmospheric sensor. She kept shaking her head like the readings didn't make sense. I asked what was wrong. She said the temperature was reading -70°C. That's -94 Fahrenheit. That's colder than it should be possible to survive in, even with our gear. But we were still moving, still breathing, so either her equipment was broken or something else was going on. Harris pointed ahead. There was a wider area, like the tunnel opened up into a larger space, and there was light coming from down there. Not the artificial light from the rigged fixtures. Different light, blue, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. We picked up our pace, came around a bend in the tunnel, and that's when we saw them, the 3 researchers. 2 were obviously dead, crushed under ice that had fallen from the ceiling. You could see their bodies half buried in the rubble, but the 3rd one was alive, sitting against the wall of the tunnel, staring straight ahead, not moving, not responding to our calls, just sitting there with that blue light washing over him. We rushed forward. Carter and Rodriguez started checking the 2 bodies while I went to the survivor. It was Dr. Matthews, one of the physicists. Younger guy, maybe 30. He was breathing, but he wasn't there. His eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing anything. I snapped my fingers in front of his face. Nothing. Checked his pulse. Steady, but slow. No visible injuries. He was in shock. Had to be. I called his name, shook his shoulder gently. That's when he spoke. Didn't look at me. Just kept staring ahead. He said, "It spoke to me. It's been speaking this whole time. We just couldn't hear it before, but now it's so loud." His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reporting the weather. I asked him what spoke to him. He didn't answer, just kept staring. I looked past him, down the tunnel to where it opened up. That blue light was coming from there, pulsing, rhythmic. And now that we were closer, I could hear something, a low hum, almost below the range of hearing. You felt it more than heard it. It made my teeth ache, made my skull vibrate. Carter came over, said the other 2 were definitely gone. We needed to get Matthews and get out. I agreed, but I couldn't stop looking at that light. Something in me, some stupid curiosity, or maybe just the need to finally know what the hell we'd been living above for 2 months, made me take a few steps forward, just to see, just to look. Carter grabbed my arm, told me to stop. But I pulled free and moved to where the tunnel widened, and I looked into the chamber beyond. I'm going to try to describe what I saw, but understand that words don't really cover it. The chamber was massive, the size of a cathedral, all ice. The walls were smooth, almost polished, like they'd been carved with precision. And in the center of that chamber, embedded in a column of ice maybe 20 feet in diameter, was something that should not exist. It was huge, 7, maybe 8 meters tall, humanoid in basic shape, 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head, but wrong, all wrong. The proportions were off, the limbs too long, the torso too narrow, and there were wings. Massive wings extending from its back, frozen in the ice, tattered and broken looking. The light was coming from the ice itself, blue bioluminescence pulsing in waves that originated from the thing in the center and spread outward. I stood there, frozen, staring at this impossible thing. And that's when I realized. It was looking back at me. Its eyes were open, black, completely black, no pupils, no whites, just black voids, and they were focused directly on me. I need you to understand something before I continue. I'm not a religious person. I already told you that. I stopped believing in God, in angels, in any of that years ago. I'd seen too much, done too much. The universe I lived in was random and cruel and empty of any divine presence. That was my reality. That was what I knew to be true. But standing there staring at that thing frozen in the ice, every certainty I'd built my worldview on just shattered, evaporated, because what I was looking at couldn't exist, shouldn't exist, but it did. It was right there in front of me, real, solid, undeniable. And in that moment, I understood why Dr. Petrov looked the way he did, why Carter drank himself unconscious, why everyone at this facility was slowly falling apart. Because once you see something that proves everything you thought you knew about reality is wrong, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to normal. You're broken forever. The thing in the ice was beautiful and horrifying at the same time. I know that sounds contradictory, but it's the only way I can describe it. The body was humanoid, but stretched, elongated, like someone had taken a human form and pulled it vertically until the proportions became alien. It had to be 7 meters tall, maybe more. The arms were too long, hanging down past where knees would be. The fingers, I could see them through the ice. They were slender and had too many joints. 3, maybe 4 joints per finger. The torso was narrow, almost skeletal, ribs visible under skin that looked grey-blue through the ice. But it was the wings that drew your eye. Massive wings extending from its back. Each one had to be 4 or 5 meters across when fully extended. But they weren't extended. They were folded, wrapped partially around the body, and they were damaged, broken. You could see where the membrane between the skeletal structure had torn, where bones had been snapped and healed wrong. These weren't functional wings. These were ruins of wings. The face is what really got me, though. I forced myself to look at the face, and I wish I hadn't. It was almost human. That's what made it so disturbing. If it had been completely alien, completely different, maybe my brain could have processed it, but it was close enough to human that you recognize the features. Eye sockets, a nose, or something like a nose, a mouth, but everything was slightly wrong. The eyes were too large, set too far apart. The nose was too narrow, barely there. And the mouth, Jesus, the mouth was too wide, extended almost to where ears would be, and it was slightly open. I could see teeth, too many teeth, sharp, not designed for eating plants. The skin on the face was smooth, but had this weird texture, almost like scales, but not quite. And the color, that grey-blue that looked almost luminescent in the pulsing light. But worst of all were the eyes. They were open, wide open, staring, completely black from edge to edge. No iris, no pupil, no white, just endless black, like looking into empty space, into nothing, and they were looking directly at me. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes. Time felt wrong in that chamber, thick, slow, like I was moving through something more dense than air. The pulsing blue light was hypnotic. It emanated from the ice itself, from the column holding the creature, radiating outward in waves. And with each pulse, that low-frequency hum would intensify. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. It was doing something to me. I could feel my thoughts getting fuzzy, like static was building in my brain. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Those black eyes held me, pinned me, and I swear on everything, I felt something touch my mind, not physically, inside. Like fingers made of thought reaching into my head, gentle, curious, ancient beyond comprehension, and sad, so impossibly sad that I wanted to cry just from the proximity to that much grief. Carter broke the spell. He grabbed me and yanked me backward, hard enough that I stumbled and fell. The connection, whatever it was, snapped like a rubber band. Suddenly I could think again, could breathe. I was gasping, hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. Carter was in my face, yelling. I couldn't hear him at first through the ringing in my ears, but gradually his words came through. "What the fuck are you doing? I told you not to look at it. Don't fucking look at it." He pulled me to my feet. Rodriguez was already getting Matthews ready to move. Chen and Harris were standing at the edge of the chamber, staring at the thing in the ice with expressions of absolute terror. Harris kept saying, "Oh my God, over and over." Chen was crying silently, tears freezing on her cheeks. Nobody had told them. The technical staff, they hadn't known what was down here, and now they did. Now we all did. We needed to move. Carter was right. We had to get Matthews out and get ourselves out before whatever that thing was doing to our heads got worse. But Matthews wasn't cooperating. He was fighting us, trying to get closer to the chamber. Kept saying, "He's calling me, can't you hear him? He's calling all of us, he needs us to hear him." It took both Rodriguez and Carter to restrain him. I helped get a harness around him so we could drag him if we had to. The whole time, I could feel those eyes on my back, watching, always watching. We started back up the tunnel, moving as fast as we could while hauling Matthews. He was still muttering, not making sense. Fragments of sentences. Waited so long, so alone. They left him here. Left all of them. The father abandoned them. No one's coming back. No one ever came back. I tried not to listen. Tried to focus on putting one foot in front of the other. But his words burrowed into my brain anyway. The climb back up that tunnel was the longest 200 meters of my life. The ice walls seemed to press in closer. The temperature was still impossibly cold. My lungs burned with every breath. Matthews was dead weight, forcing us to practically carry him. And that hum, that subsonic vibration from the chamber, it followed us. Got quieter as we climbed, but never fully went away. I could still feel it in my teeth. In my skull, like it had marked me somehow, like I'd been tagged with something I'd never be able to wash off. We finally reached the security door. Harris and Chen went through first. Then Rodriguez and Carter dragged Matthews through. I was last. Before I stepped through, I looked back down that tunnel one more time. The blue light was still pulsing, still visible from where I stood, and I swear I heard something, not with my ears, in my head, a voice. Deep, old, tired. It said one word, finally. Then the door slammed shut and the voice was gone. We got Matthews to the medical bay. The doctor, a woman named Reyes, sedated him immediately. He fought it, kept trying to talk, to tell us what he'd heard, what the thing had shown him. But the drugs took him under eventually. Reyes did a full examination. Physically, he was fine. No injuries, no frostbite, nothing to explain his mental state, but his brain activity was off the charts. She showed us the EEG readings, patterns she'd never seen before, abnormal firing in areas that shouldn't be that active. She said it was like his brain was trying to process something it wasn't designed to process, like he'd been exposed to information that human neurology couldn't handle. The rest of us got checked too. Carter and Rodriguez were showing elevated activity as well, though not as severe as Matthews. Harris and Chen were borderline catatonic. They'd been closest to the chamber for the longest time. Whatever that thing was, whatever it was doing, it affected people differently based on exposure. Reyes sedated them too. Then she turned to me, asked if I was experiencing any symptoms, voices, visions, intrusive thoughts. I lied. Said no, but I was. Even then, standing in the medical bay, I could feel something in the back of my mind. Not a voice, not yet, but a presence. Something aware, something watching from inside my own head, and it was waiting. I lied to Dr. Reyes, told her I was fine. No symptoms, no voices, nothing. But that wasn't true. Even standing there in the medical bay, answering her questions, going through her tests, I could feel it. A presence in the back of my mind, like someone standing just behind you in a dark room. You can't see them, but you know they're there. You can feel their attention on you. That's what it was like. Constant, unshakable, and getting stronger. The others were sedated, sleeping off whatever that thing had done to their brains, but I'd refused the drugs. Told Reyes I needed to stay alert in case there was another emergency. Truth was, I was terrified of what I might hear if I let my guard down, if I let myself slip into unconsciousness. So I stayed awake, stayed moving, went back to my quarters, and just sat there on my bunk, staring at the wall, trying to keep my thoughts organized, trying to keep that presence from pushing any deeper into my head. Colonel Bradshaw called an emergency meeting 2 hours after we got back. Everyone who'd been on the rescue team. We gathered in the conference room, looking like survivors of a war. Carter was stone-faced as always, but his hands were shaking. Rodriguez kept rubbing his eyes like he was trying to clear something from his vision. Harris and Chen were awake now, but heavily sedated, moving slow, not making eye contact with anyone. Matthews was still out, strapped to a bed in medical. Bradshaw stood at the head of the table and laid it out plain. What we'd seen was classified at the highest possible level. We'd all signed NDAs, but he wanted to make it crystal clear. If any of us spoke about this to anyone ever, we would be prosecuted under the Espionage Act. That meant life in prison at minimum. He didn't say it explicitly, but the implication was clear. People who threatened national security sometimes just disappeared. He looked at each of us when he said that. making sure we understood. Then he said the operation on sub-level 4 was suspended pending investigation. The tunnel was being sealed. No one goes down there. No exceptions. He dismissed us, told us to get some rest and report for normal duties tomorrow, like nothing had happened. Like nothing had happened, right? I went back to my quarters, tried to sleep, couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black eyes staring at me, saw those broken wings, that too wide mouth. So I just lay there in the dark, listening to the hum of the ventilation system, the distant sounds of the facility settling, and that's when I heard it for the first time. Not heard, that's not the right word. Felt it, received it. A voice that wasn't a voice. It didn't come through my ears. It bypassed them entirely, went straight into my brain, direct, intimate, unavoidable. And it said, finally, after so much time, so much silence, finally, someone who can truly hear. I sat up so fast I almost fell out of my bunk. My heart was slamming against my ribs. I looked around the room. Nothing. I was alone. The voice wasn't external. It was inside my head. Do not be afraid, Daniel. It knew my name. How the fuck did it know my name? I grabbed my jacket and stumbled out into the corridor. Other people were still awake. Saw Rodriguez heading to the mess hall. Saw one of the researchers walking past. Everyone looked normal. No one else was hearing this. It was just me. Why just me? I made it to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, stared at myself in the mirror. I looked like hell, eyes bloodshot, skin pale, hands trembling. I thought maybe I was having a breakdown, PTSD flashback, psychotic break, something explainable, something that made sense. But then the voice came again. You are not losing your mind, Daniel. You are, for the first time in your life, truly sane. You are perceiving what others cannot. You are hearing what has been spoken into the void for millennia. I gripped the edges of the sink so hard my knuckles went white. I said out loud, "What are you?" My voice sounded weak, scared. There was a pause. Then the voice responded, "I am what remains. I am the last of those who watched, the abandoned, the forgotten." I went back to my quarters and locked the door, sat on my bunk with my back against the wall. I'd kept a knife against regulations, hidden in my mattress. I pulled it out now, held it. The cold metal was real, solid, something to anchor myself to reality. The voice didn't stop. It continued, calm and patient. "I know you are frightened. All of your kind are frightened when they first hear, when they first understand that they are not alone in their minds. But I mean you no harm. I have no capacity for harm anymore. I am frozen, imprisoned. I have been here for longer than your species has had written language. All I have is my voice. And now, finally, someone who can hear it." I asked, why me? Why could I hear when others couldn't? The voice answered, "Because you are empty, Daniel. You have excavated your soul of faith, of hope, of illusion. You do not believe in divine protection or cosmic justice. You accept the universe as cruel and random. That emptiness makes you receptive. That despair makes you capable of hearing truth." The hours crawled by. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. The voice continued talking, not constantly. It would speak for a while, then go silent, then speak again. It told me things I didn't want to know. It told me it had been an observer, a watcher, one of many created to shepherd humanity, to guide us, to report back on our progress. But the one who created us, the one you call God, he grew disappointed. Humanity was his experiment and you failed. Over and over you failed. Violence, cruelty, self-destruction. He gave you every opportunity to rise above your base nature and you squandered them all. 2,000 years ago, he left, simply withdrew his presence from the universe. And we, his servants, we were left behind, abandoned with no purpose and no hope of his return. I asked what happened to the others, the other watchers. The voice went quiet for a long moment. Then, some went mad, some destroyed themselves, some tried to continue the mission even though it was pointless. And some, like me, chose imprisonment, chose to sleep rather than witness the slow decay of a creation abandoned by its creator. I sat there in the dark, knife in hand, listening to this impossible voice tell me the story of God's departure. Part of me still thought I was insane, that I'd had a psychotic break and this was all hallucination. But another part of me, the part that had stopped believing in God back in Afghanistan, the part that had accepted the universe as empty and meaningless, that part recognized the truth in what I was hearing. It fit. It explained so much. Why prayers went unanswered, why good people suffered, why the world was so full of horror and cruelty, because no one was watching anymore, no one was listening. We were alone. We'd always been alone, and the beings that were supposed to protect us had either given up or gone insane from the isolation. The voice continued. I do not tell you this to hurt you, Daniel. I tell you because you deserve to know. Your species has spent millennia praying to silence, building temples to absence, killing each other over interpretations of messages that were already obsolete when they were written. You deserve to know that you were right. Your instinct to stop believing was correct. There is no father watching over you. There never will be again. Dawn came eventually, grey light filtering through the small window in my quarters. I hadn't moved from my position against the wall. The knife was still in my hand. The voice had gone quiet about an hour before, leaving me alone with my thoughts, which were a mess, a complete mess. I knew I should report this. Tell Bradshaw or Reyes that I was experiencing auditory hallucinations. Get sedated like the others. But I didn't. Because somewhere in the chaos of my mind, I'd made a decision. I wanted to hear more. I needed to hear more. Because if what that voice was telling me was true, if God had really abandoned us, then everything I'd believed since Afghanistan was validated. I wasn't a broken, faithless sinner. I was just someone who'd seen reality clearly. And that voice, that ancient presence frozen in the ice 200 meters below me, it was the only thing in the universe that had ever given me a straight answer about why the world was the way it was. So I got up, got dressed, went to breakfast, like nothing was wrong. And when people asked if I was okay, I smiled and said I was fine, just tired. But in the back of my mind, always in the back of my mind, I could feel it watching, waiting, preparing to tell me more truths that would break me apart piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the raw acceptance of cosmic abandonment. 3 days after the accident, Bradshaw called me to his office. I knew it was coming, knew they'd figured out that something was different about me. Matthews was still heavily sedated, barely conscious. The others from the rescue team were functional but shaken. But me? I was acting normal. Too normal. That had to raise flags. I walked into Bradshaw's office and found him there with Dr. Petrov and another man I'd never seen before. Civilian clothes, expensive suit. He introduced himself as Dr. Vance from DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the people who develop weapons and technology that won't see public use for decades. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He said they'd been monitoring brain activity in everyone who'd been exposed to the entity. Matthews showed extreme abnormal patterns. The others showed moderate disturbances, but mine were different. Active communication patterns, synaptic firing consistent with receiving and processing external information. He asked me directly. It's talking to you, isn't it? I thought about lying, considered it for maybe half a second. Then I nodded. Yeah, it's talking to me. Vance smiled like I'd just confirmed his thesis. He said that's exactly what they'd hoped would happen. The entity had been trying to communicate for months, but most people couldn't receive it clearly. Their minds couldn't handle the frequency or the method. It caused psychosis, hallucinations, breakdown. But occasionally, someone came along whose brain was wired differently. Someone who could act as a clear channel. He said I was valuable, an asset, and they needed me to go back down to sub-level 4, to sit with the entity, to facilitate communication while they recorded and analyzed everything. It wasn't a request, it was an order. I asked what would happen if I refused. Bradshaw answered that one. He said my contract had clauses about cooperation with research objectives. Refusing would be breach of contract, and given the classified nature of the project, breach could be treated as a security violation. Back to those threats of prosecution or worse. I didn't have a choice. I never really had a choice. They set up equipment in the chamber. Took them 2 days. I wasn't involved in that part, but when they brought me down, the place had been transformed into a laboratory. Portable generators, lighting arrays, monitoring equipment everywhere, sensors attached to the ice column containing the entity, and a single chair positioned maybe 5 meters from the frozen creature, wired with electrodes, brain activity monitors, heart rate, blood pressure, everything. They wanted to record what happened when the entity and I communicated. Dr. Petrov was there, looking worse than ever. Vance was there with 2 assistants, and Bradshaw, observing from near the tunnel entrance like he didn't want to get too close. They had me sit in the chair, started attaching electrodes to my head, my chest. The whole time I could feel those black eyes on me, could feel the presence in my mind growing stronger, more focused. It was almost eager, like it had been waiting for this. Vance gave me instructions. He wanted me to try to establish clear communication, to ask specific questions, to get detailed responses. He had a list prepared, questions about the entity's origin, its purpose, the nature of its existence. I looked at the list and then looked at the thing in the ice. I said, "It doesn't work like that. I can't just interrogate it. It talks when it wants to talk." Vance frowned, started to argue. But then the voice came, loud enough that I actually flinched. "The human is correct. I am not a database to be queried, but I am willing to speak. I have been silent for so long. Let me tell you what I am. Let me tell you why I am here." I relayed that to Vance. He looked excited and terrified at the same time. He told his assistants to start recording everything. Then he nodded to me. I looked at the entity, thought, "Okay, tell me." And it began. "I have been called many things throughout the ages. Angel, Watcher, Guardian, Seraphim, Cherubim. The names your species invented to categorize what you could not comprehend. But these are just labels, attempts to fit the infinite into the finite boundaries of human language. The truth is simpler and more terrible. I was a servant, one of many, created for a singular purpose, to observe you, to watch over the grand experiment that was humanity." I could feel the weight of those words in my mind. The entity's voice carried emotions with it, not just meaning but feeling, sadness, resignation, ancient grief. It continued, "Your God, the one you pray to, the one you build temples for, he was real, is real perhaps somewhere beyond this reality. He created you, fashioned you from the basic materials of this universe and breathed into you something of himself, consciousness, free will, the capacity for good and evil. It was an experiment to see if beings with free will would choose to rise, to evolve beyond their base instincts, to become something worthy of the divine spark they carried. I asked the question that had to be asked. And? Did we pass? The entity's response was a feeling of profound disappointment before the words even came. "No, Daniel, you failed, spectacularly and repeatedly. For thousands of years we watched. We observed as you developed language, tools, civilization. We saw moments of beauty, art, philosophy, love, but for every moment of transcendence, there were 100 moments of cruelty. You enslaved each other, murdered each other, created gods in your own image and used them as justification for genocide. You were given paradise and you turned it into hell, over and over. Different ages, different cultures, but always the same pattern. Violence, greed, tribalism. You never learned. And he, the creator, he watched it all with growing dismay." The entity paused. When it continued, the sadness in its voice was overwhelming. 2,000 years ago, he made his decision. He had given you every chance, sent messengers, performed miracles, offered covenant after covenant, and still you chose darkness more often than light. So he left, simply withdrew his presence from this creation, moved on to other experiments perhaps, or perhaps he simply retreated into himself, disappointed beyond measure. I do not know. None of us knew. We only knew that one day his voice was gone. The connection we had always felt, the purpose that had driven us for eons, it simply vanished. I sat there, electrodes stuck to my head, listening to the systematic dismantling of every religious framework humanity had ever constructed. Vance and his team were frantically taking notes, checking their equipment, recording everything. But I don't think they understood. Not really. They were treating this like a scientific curiosity. They didn't grasp the existential horror of what was being revealed. I did. God was real, and he'd given up on us, left us behind like a failed project. I asked, what happened to the others, the other angels? The entity's response came with a wave of emotion so intense I had to grip the arms of the chair to stay grounded. We were abandoned too, Daniel, created to serve a purpose and then left without purpose when he departed. Some of us went mad immediately. The loss of his presence was like having your soul torn out. They raged across the earth, causing destruction until they burned themselves out. Others tried to continue the mission, pretending he was still watching, but the futility broke them eventually. Some destroyed themselves, simply ceased to exist because they could not bear the emptiness. And some of us, a few, we made different choices. I chose imprisonment, the entity said. I came here, to the furthest point from human civilization I could find. I used what power remained to me to encase myself in ice, to enter a state of hibernation, because I knew if I stayed conscious, if I continued to watch your species spiral further into darkness without any hope of divine intervention, I would eventually do something terrible. The rage of abandonment, the despair of purposelessness, it would have consumed me. I would have become what your myths call a demon, a destroyer. So I chose to sleep, to wait in frozen silence for either his return or the end of all things. The entity's eyes, those bottomless black voids, seemed to bore into me even through meters of ice. But sleep was never complete. I dreamed, Daniel. For millennia I dreamed, and in my dreams I heard your prayers, felt your suffering, your wars, your plagues, your endless, pointless cruelty to each other, and no one answered you, no one came, because no one was listening anymore. I realized I was crying, tears running down my face. I didn't even know when I'd started. Vance was asking me something, but I couldn't hear him. All I could hear was that voice, that ancient, tired, heartbroken voice. I said, voice shaking, "Why should I believe any of this? How do I know you're not just something that's been frozen here lying to me?" The entity's response was immediate. "Because you already know it's true, Daniel. You knew it in Kabul when you held that dying child, and your prayers were met with silence. You knew it every day, since when you looked at the world and saw only randomness and suffering without purpose. You stopped believing in God not because you were weak or faithless, but because you were honest. You saw clearly what others refused to see, that we are alone in an indifferent universe, that there is no cosmic justice, no divine plan, just the echo of a presence that once was and is no more. And God help me, it was right. Every word resonated with something I'd felt for years, but never fully articulated. The entity continued, softer now. I do not tell you this to hurt you. I tell you because you deserve truth. Your species has suffered long enough under the delusion of divine oversight. You pray to silence. You wait for salvation that will never come. Perhaps knowing the truth will free you, or perhaps it will break you. Either way, you will finally understand why the universe feels so empty, because it is. The sessions continued for 5 days. Every day they'd bring me down to that chamber, wire me up to their equipment, and I'd sit there communicating with the entity while Vance and his team recorded everything. Each session lasted hours. By the 3rd day I was exhausted, not physically tired, though I wasn't sleeping well, mentally drained. Having an ancient being pour millennia of memories and emotions directly into your brain takes a toll. But on the 6th day, something changed. The entity's tone shifted. The resigned sadness that had characterized our conversations was replaced by something else. Urgency, almost panic. When they sat me down and started the session, the entity didn't wait for me to initiate contact. It reached out immediately, and the force of its presence in my mind nearly knocked me out of the chair. "Daniel, we are running out of time. There is something you must understand. Something I should have told you from the beginning, but I was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean. I asked what it was talking about. My voice came out shaky. I could feel Vance and the others watching me, could hear them adjusting their equipment to capture whatever was happening, but I barely registered them. The entity's presence was overwhelming, demanding my full attention. You finding me was not random chance, Daniel. This facility, this excavation, it was deliberately searching. Your government, your military, they have known for decades that something was buried here. Old texts, ancient maps, geological anomalies. They pieced together enough to know something existed beneath the ice. And they found me. They woke me. I felt cold wash over me, colder than the air in that chamber. You were asleep? Fully asleep? The entity responded. Yes. For nearly 2,000 years I maintained complete stasis. Dreaming, yes, but dormant, contained, safe. But your drilling, your excavation, the vibrations, the heat from your equipment, it began to wake me. Slowly at first, then faster. And when I started to wake, when my consciousness began to stir, it sent out a signal. An old signal, a protocol we established long ago. My hands were gripping the armrests so hard my fingers hurt. What kind of protocol? The entity paused, and I felt something like fear emanating from it. Fear from a being that had existed for thousands of years, that terrified me more than anything else had. We are not alone, Daniel. I am not the only one who chose imprisonment. When we scattered after his departure, when we each made our choices about how to handle the abandonment, several of us chose the same path I did. We could not bear to watch humanity anymore, could not trust ourselves not to destroy in our rage and despair. So we found remote places, far from civilization. And we buried ourselves, entombed ourselves in ice, in stone, in the deepest parts of the ocean. We put ourselves into forced hibernation, hoping to sleep until either he returned or the universe ended. There are 7 of us, 7 who chose imprisonment over madness. 7. The number hit me like a physical blow. I thought about what one of these things could do if it woke up fully, if it decided humanity wasn't worth preserving. 7 of them scattered across the planet. I asked where. Where were the others? The entity's response came with images, flashes of locations poured into my mind. A mountain range I didn't recognize, but looked like the Himalayas. The Mariana Trench, deepest part of the ocean, somewhere in Siberia under permafrost. The Amazon rainforest, buried under centuries of growth. Lake Vostok in Antarctica, not far from where we were now. And 2 others I couldn't quite place, but felt ancient and isolated. We established a failsafe, Daniel, a connection between us. If one of us began to wake, if our stasis was disturbed, it would trigger the others. A warning system, so that if he ever returned, if he ever came back for us, we would all wake together to receive him. But he has not returned. And now, because your species found me, because you disturbed my sleep, the protocol has activated. The others are waking. I felt my stomach drop. Vance was shouting questions at me, asking what was happening, why my vitals were spiking. I ignored him. How long? How long until they wake up completely? The entity's voice was heavy with dread. It varies. Depends on how deeply they were sleeping, how stable their prisons are. But the process has begun, and it cannot be stopped. Some may wake in months, others in a year, but they will wake, Daniel, all of them. And when they do, when they emerge from their prisons and see that he still has not returned, when they feel the weight of 2,000 more years of abandonment, they will not be the guardians we once were. We are broken things, Daniel, mad with grief and rage. We were never meant to exist without his presence. It was like cutting the strings of a puppet and expecting it to still dance. We will destroy, not because we are evil, but because we are in pain beyond your comprehension, and we have no purpose left except to express that pain. I asked the question I dreaded the answer to. What will happen when they wake up fully? The entity showed me, not words, images. Visions poured directly into my brain, and I couldn't shut them out. Cities collapsing, earthquakes that split continents, storms that boiled oceans. Not because these entities wanted to destroy civilization, But because their mere presence, their consciousness operating at full power, warped reality around them. They were beings designed to exist partially in this dimension and partially in others. When they moved, space itself bent. When they spoke, sound became a physical force. When they were stable, when they were sane, they could control this, minimize the effect, but they weren't stable anymore. None of them were. We are not your salvation, Daniel. We are not angels come to rescue humanity in its darkest hour. We are the abandoned children of a God who gave up on all of us. And when we wake fully, when all 7 of us are conscious and aware and realize he is still gone, still absent after all this time, our grief alone will tear this world apart. I was shaking, actually shaking in the chair. The electrodes were probably recording brain activity that looked like a seizure. I could hear Vance yelling for Dr. Reyes. Could hear people moving around me, but I stayed focused on the entity. I had to know. Is there anything we can do? Any way to stop this? The entity's response was immediate. Kill me. Destroy this place. Use whatever weapons you have. Nuclear if necessary. Completely obliterate me and this entire section of ice. If I am destroyed, if my signal stops completely, it might interrupt the protocol, might put the others back into deeper sleep. Buy you time, maybe decades, maybe centuries. It is not certain, but it is the only chance you have. I stared at those black eyes through the ice. You're asking me to kill you? The entity's voice was soft now, almost gentle. I am asking you to grant me peace, Daniel. I have been conscious for too long, seen too much, felt too much. I am tired beyond measure. And if my death can buy your species even a little more time, then let it have meaning. Let my end serve a purpose, since my existence has had none since he left. And I relayed all of this to Vance. Every word, every image. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. He said that wasn't going to happen. This entity was the most significant discovery in human history. They weren't going to destroy it. They were going to study it, learn from it, maybe even find a way to use it. I tried to explain what it had shown me. The other entities, the protocol, the coming apocalypse, but he wasn't listening, or he didn't believe me. Or maybe he did believe me and just didn't care because the potential scientific and military applications outweighed the risk. He ordered the session ended, had me pulled from the chair. As they were disconnecting the electrodes, the entity spoke one last time. Then it is too late, Daniel. They will continue their research. They will keep me awake, keep me conscious, keep the signal broadcasting, and the others will wake. I have given you truth and warning. What you do with it is beyond my control now, but know this, the signs have already begun. Seismic activity in regions that should be stable, weather patterns that defy explanation. Your scientists will call it climate change, natural phenomena. But it is not natural, it is them, stirring in their sleep, responding to my call. And soon, very soon, they will open their eyes. They dragged me out of the chamber. I looked back once. Those black eyes followed me. And I could swear I saw something in them I hadn't seen before. Not sadness, not resignation, pity. The entity pitied us. Pitied what was coming for humanity, now that we'd been foolish enough to disturb its sleep. I woke up the next morning to the sound of helicopters, multiple helicopters. That alone was wrong. We never had air traffic at the facility. Everything came in on predetermined schedules, usually weeks apart. But these were unscheduled, unannounced, and from the sound of it, military-grade transport choppers. I got dressed fast and went into the corridor. Other people were already there, looking confused and worried. Rodriguez grabbed my arm and said lockdown had been initiated 20 minutes ago. All communications severed, no one in or out except for whoever was arriving. We made our way to the common area, and that's when we saw them through the small windows. 3 Black Hawks touching down on the ice shelf above us. Soldiers poured out, not regular military. These were special operations. You could tell by the way they moved, the equipment they carried. They came into the facility like they owned it, which I guess they did. Colonel Bradshaw met them at the entrance, and even from a distance I could see he looked nervous. Whatever was happening, he hadn't been fully briefed either. Within an hour, they'd taken complete control of the facility. We were ordered to our quarters. Doors locked from the outside, armed guards posted in the corridors. Nobody was allowed to communicate with anyone else. I sat in my room listening to footsteps passing by, voices shouting orders, equipment being moved. Something big was happening, and they were making sure we couldn't interfere or witness it. Around noon, they started pulling people out for interviews, one at a time. You'd hear the door unlock, see two soldiers escort someone out, and then nothing. Hours would pass before the next person. I tried to track the pattern but couldn't. It seemed random, or maybe it wasn't random at all. Maybe they were targeting specific people, the ones who'd been in the chamber, the ones who'd seen too much. When they came for me, it was late afternoon. Two soldiers, neither of them speaking, just gesturing for me to follow. They took me to the conference room, where I'd had my first debriefing with Bradshaw weeks ago. Felt like years. Inside was a man I'd never seen before. Military uniform but no name tag, no rank insignia, nothing identifying. He sat across from me and laid out photographs. Screenshots from the monitoring equipment during my sessions with the entity, transcripts of what I'd said during those sessions, brain scans showing the abnormal activity. He asked me to confirm this was accurate. I said yes. He asked if I was still hearing the voice. I hesitated, then nodded. He made a note. Then he asked the question that made my blood run cold. Do you believe what it told you? About God? About the others? About what's coming? I looked at him, really looked at him. His eyes were hard. This wasn't a man looking for truth. This was a man looking for threats. I chose my words carefully, said I didn't know what to believe, that I'd experienced something I couldn't explain, but that didn't mean I understood it. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, "You're going to forget everything that happened here. You're going to sign new documents, accept new terms. And you're going to go home and never speak of this again, understood?" I said I understood. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his face. But what could he do? Lock me up forever? Kill me? Maybe, probably, but not yet. Not until they'd extracted every piece of useful information from everyone who'd been exposed. They sent me back to my quarters. I passed Dr. Chen in the hallway being escorted to her interview. She looked terrified. That night I couldn't sleep, lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to activity throughout the facility. They were moving equipment, lots of it, heavy machinery being transported down to the lower levels. I could hear the cargo elevator running constantly. They were expanding operations down there, despite everything the entity had told me, despite the warnings. They were going deeper, studying it more intensively. And somewhere in the back of my mind I could feel the entity's presence, awake, alert, and afraid, not for itself, for us, for what was coming because we were too stupid or too arrogant to listen. The next morning, everything changed. I was in my quarters when I heard the alarm, not the emergency alarm from before, something different. Louder, more urgent, then gunfire. Actual gunfire echoing through the corridors. I grabbed my door handle, but it was still locked from the outside. I could hear people running, shouting, more gunshots, then screaming. Not the scream of someone hurt, the scream of someone seeing something that broke their mind. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to figure out what was happening. The intercom crackled to life. Bradshaw's voice, barely recognizable, shaking with terror. "All personnel evacuate to level 1 immediately. This is not a drill. Evacuate now." Then the intercom cut out. My door lock disengaged. Someone must have hit the master override. I pulled the door open and stepped into chaos. People running in every direction. Some of them were bleeding from their noses, their ears. Some were just standing in place, staring at nothing, completely catatonic. I grabbed Rodriguez as he ran past, asked him what happened. He looked at me with wild eyes and said, "It's awake, really awake, and it's angry." I ran toward the stairs leading up to level 1. That's when I saw Dr. Petrov. He was in one of the labs, working frantically at a computer terminal. The door was open. I could see him uploading files to a satellite uplink, sending data out, breaking every protocol we had. I was about to call out to him when 3 soldiers came around the corner. They saw what he was doing. Didn't hesitate, didn't shout a warning, didn't order him to stop. The lead soldier just raised his rifle and shot Petrov in the head. One shot, clean, professional, Petrov dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The soldiers moved to the terminal, started wiping the data. They saw me, standing there. For a second, I thought they were going to shoot me too. One of them raised his weapon, but then the lights flickered. That same power drain I'd felt before, but 100 times stronger. Every light in the corridor went dark for 3 full seconds. When they came back on, the soldiers were on the ground, not dead, conscious, but bleeding from their eyes, their noses, their ears, staring at nothing, catatonic. I ran. The entity was doing something. I could feel it in my head, not words anymore, just raw emotion and power. It was thrashing against its prison, not physically, mentally, psychically, sending out waves of consciousness so powerful they were frying people's brains. Not everyone. Some people seemed immune or at least resistant, but others were dropping like flies. I made it to level 1, and it was complete chaos. Half the personnel were on the ground, catatonic or convulsing. The soldiers who'd arrived that morning were trying to maintain order, but they were affected too. I saw one of them walk into a wall over and over, like he couldn't perceive it was there. Saw another one sitting on the floor, laughing and crying at the same time. The entity's voice cut through the chaos in my mind. "I am sorry, Daniel. I did not want this, but they were hurting me, probing, drilling, trying to extract samples. The pain woke something in me I'd kept buried. The rage. I tried to contain it, but I cannot. Not anymore. You must run. Get as far from here as you can. Tell them what I told you. Warn them. It is the only purpose left to either of us now." I made it to the equipment storage. The area was abandoned. Everyone either evacuating or incapacitated. I grabbed cold weather gear, the best they had. Extreme survival suit rated for -80. Grabbed a pack, stuffed it with supplies, emergency rations, flares, first aid kit, a portable GPS unit, even though I knew it probably wouldn't work properly this far south. There was a snowmobile in the garage bay. Keys in the ignition, because why would you need to lock anything in a secret facility in Antarctica? I started it up. The engine roared to life. I looked back one time at the entrance to the facility. Smoke was coming from somewhere inside. People were still staggering out, some of them helping others, some of them wandering aimlessly. I wanted to help, wanted to go back, but the entity's voice pushed me forward. "Go. There is nothing you can do for them, but you can warn others. You must warn others." I gunned the engine and drove out into the Antarctic night. The nearest research station that wasn't classified was McMurdo Station, but that was over 300 kilometers away, too far on a snowmobile with limited fuel. But I'd heard mention of a smaller station, some kind of international climate research outpost, maybe 40 kilometers northwest. That was survivable. Maybe. The temperature outside was -50 Celsius. The wind was brutal. Even with the survival suit, I could feel the cold trying to get in. The snowmobile's headlight cut a narrow path through absolute darkness. Antarctica in winter, no sun, just endless black and ice and wind that screamed like the souls of the damned. I drove for what felt like hours, lost all sense of time. My fingers were numb on the handlebars, even through the insulated gloves. My face hurt. Every breath burned in my lungs, and through it all, the entity's voice in my head, not words, just a presence, a reminder, a witness to my escape. I didn't know if it was helping me or just watching. Maybe it didn't know either. I found the station purely by luck. A cluster of lights in the distance, solar-powered emergency beacons marking the location. I drove toward them like they were salvation itself. The snowmobile sputtered twice, running on fumes, but it made it. I pulled up to the entrance and fell off the vehicle. My legs barely worked. I crawled to the door and pounded on it. Someone opened it, saw me lying there, started shouting for help. They pulled me inside. I remember warmth. Blessed, beautiful warmth. People asking me questions. Where did I come from? What happened? Was I alone? I tried to answer, but my mouth wasn't working right. The cold had done something to me. They got me to a medical bay, started treating me for hypothermia and frostbite. I was fading in and out of consciousness. But before I went under completely, I grabbed the doctor's arm. managed to say, "They need to know. Everyone needs to know. It's waking up. They're all waking up." The doctor looked confused, probably thought I was delirious. Maybe I was. But as I slipped into unconsciousness, I felt the entity's presence fade from my mind. Not gone, just distant. And with it came one final message. "You survived, Daniel. Now make it mean something. Tell them. Even if they don't believe you, even if they call you crazy, tell them what's coming. It is all either of us can do now." I spent 3 days at that research station recovering from hypothermia and frostbite. Lost 2 toes on my left foot. They turned black and had to be amputated. Small price to pay for surviving, I guess. The people there were good people. Scientists from Norway, Chile, a few Americans. They asked questions but accepted my vague answers about a mechanical failure at another station and the emergency evacuation. They were just happy to help someone in distress. But on the 4th day, everything changed. A helicopter arrived, not a rescue chopper, military transport. 2 men in civilian clothes stepped out and walked straight to the medical bay where I was resting. They showed credentials to the station chief, CIA. They said I was a person of interest in a classified matter and needed to come with them immediately. The Norwegians protested, said I needed more medical care. The agents didn't argue, just repeated that I was leaving with them. Now, I didn't fight it. What would be the point? I'd known this was coming from the moment I escaped. They weren't going to just let me disappear. They flew me to Christchurch, New Zealand. From there, a private jet to somewhere in Virginia. I was never told exactly where. Some kind of government facility that didn't officially exist. I was put in a room, not a cell exactly, but close. Comfortable bed, bathroom, television that only played news channels, but the door locked from the outside. For 2 days, nobody talked to me except the person who brought meals. Then the interviews started. Different people every time. Sometimes 1 person, sometimes 3. Always the same questions. What did I see? What did the entity tell me? Did I tell anyone else? Did I record anything? Take any evidence? I told them everything. What choice did I have? I described the entity, the chamber, the conversations, the warnings. Some of them took notes. Some just stared at me like I was insane. One of them, older guy in an expensive suit, asked me point blank if I understood how crazy I sounded. I said yes. I said I knew exactly how it sounded, but that didn't make it less true. The debriefing went on for a week. Every day, hours of questions. They brought in psychiatrists who tried to convince me I'd had a psychotic break, that the stress and isolation had caused hallucinations, that there was no entity, no voice, no warnings about the end of the world. Just my damaged mind creating narratives to cope with trauma. I almost believed them a few times, almost let myself think that maybe I had lost it. That would be easier, wouldn't it? Easier than accepting what I'd learned. But then I'd remember those black eyes staring at me through the ice, the weight of that ancient presence in my mind, the absolute certainty I'd felt when the entity spoke. That wasn't hallucination. That was real. So I stuck to my story. And eventually, they stopped trying to convince me otherwise. Instead, they started threatening me, made it clear what would happen if I talked. Prison at best, disappearance at worst. They had photographs of my apartment back home, of my ex-girlfriend, of my parents who I hadn't spoken to in years. The message was clear: stay quiet or people get hurt. Then came the paperwork. Jesus Christ, the paperwork. New NDAs that made the previous ones look like permission slips. Documents that outlined in excruciating legal detail every possible consequence of disclosure. Espionage charges, treason charges, asset forfeiture, indefinite detention without trial under national security provisions. I signed everything, every page. What else was I going to do? But then came something I wasn't expecting: a bank account number, routing information, and a contract stating that in exchange for my continued silence and cooperation, I would receive a one-time payment of $500,000, compensation for the termination of my employment contract and damages incurred during service. I stared at that number, $500,000. They were buying my silence, not with threats alone, though those were plentiful. but with money. Enough money to disappear, to start over somewhere new, to never have to worry about rent or bills or basic survival again. It was brilliant, really. Carrot and stick. Talk, and we destroy you. Stay quiet, and we make you rich. I took the money. Of course I took it. What would you have done? I signed the final documents, and 3 days later they put me on a commercial flight back to the States, gave me a new phone with a new number, said my old apartment had been cleared out, my belongings put in storage. They'd arranged for a temporary place for me in a different city, somewhere I could lay low for a while. When I landed, there was a car waiting. Driver didn't say a word, just took me to an extended stay hotel in the suburbs of Atlanta. Room was already paid for. 6 months in advance. There was an envelope on the bed with a debit card and a note. The funds have been transferred. Use them wisely. Remember your obligations. I checked my phone. Logged into the new bank account they'd set up for me, and there it was. $500,000, just sitting there. Blood money, silence money. I stared at that number for an hour, then I threw up. Because they'd done it. They'd bought me. Or at least they thought they had. For the first month I did what they expected. Laid low, didn't talk to anyone, didn't go anywhere, just sat in that hotel room watching the news and trying to process everything that had happened. The nightmares were constant. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the entity, heard its voice, felt the weight of its grief and rage. I started drinking to sleep. Didn't help much. The entity was always there, waiting in my dreams. But slowly, gradually, I started to notice things. News reports that didn't quite add up. Seismic activity in places that shouldn't have earthquakes. Greenland, Siberia, the Mariana Trench. Small tremors at first. The kind that scientists would dismiss as normal tectonic activity, but the frequency was increasing. Every week there were more reports, and the patterns, if you look closely enough, they weren't random. They were radiating out from specific points. Points that matched the locations the entity had shown me, where the others were imprisoned, where they were waking up. I started keeping track, made a map on the wall of my hotel room, marked every unexplained seismic event, every strange weather pattern, every anomaly that the news mentioned and then quickly moved past. Freak magnetic storms over the Himalayas that disrupted all electronic equipment for 50 miles. An unexplained temperature spike in the Antarctic peninsula near Lake Vostok that melted 3 square kilometers of ice in a week. Mass bird deaths in the Amazon, thousands of them just falling from the sky simultaneously for no apparent reason. Fishermen in the Pacific reporting areas of ocean that had turned pitch black, so dark you couldn't see a foot below the surface. Scientists were baffled, blamed climate change, solar activity, natural phenomena. But I knew what it really was. The others were stirring, responding to the signal. The protocol was active and nothing was going to stop it. The entity had been right. We had months, maybe a year, and already the signs were everywhere for anyone willing to see them. 3 months after I got back to the States, I made a decision. I couldn't stay quiet. The money didn't matter. The threats didn't matter. What mattered was that people needed to know. They deserved to know what was coming, even if they didn't believe me, even if they thought I was crazy. I had to try, so I moved, used some of the money to disappear properly, paid cash for everything, bought a used car that wasn't registered in my name, found a cheap motel in the middle of nowhere, rural Oklahoma, the kind of place where nobody asks questions as long as you pay in cash, set up a laptop using public Wi-Fi from a coffee shop 20 miles away, created anonymous accounts, started writing everything down, everything I remembered, every detail the entity had shared, every warning it had given, and now I'm recording this, sitting in a motel room that smells like cigarettes and mildew, telling you everything because someone needs to know. Someone needs to hear this before it's too late. Or maybe it's already too late. Maybe the moment we drilled down to that chamber, the moment we woke the entity, the countdown started and nothing can stop it now. Look at the news. Really look at it. Not the headlines about politics or celebrity gossip. Look at the stuff buried in the back pages, the science sections, the weird stories that don't make sense, unexplained phenomena happening all over the world with increasing frequency. Just yesterday there was a report about a massive sinkhole that opened up in Siberia, over a kilometer wide. perfectly circular. It appeared overnight. Scientists have no explanation, said it might be methane release from permafrost thaw. But I saw the satellite images. It's not a sinkhole, it's an excavation. Something dug its way out from below. And last week, seismologists recorded vibrations coming from the Mariana Trench. Low frequency, rhythmic. They're calling it underwater volcanic activity. But I know what rhythm sounds like. That's breathing. Something down there is breathing. The entity told me they were buried under ice, under stone, under the deepest ocean. And now they're waking up. All of them, one by one. You think this is climate change? You think these are natural disasters? You're wrong. This is the beginning of something else entirely. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm crazy. Some conspiracy theorist who had a mental breakdown and is seeing patterns where there aren't any. Maybe you're right. God, I hope you're right. I hope I did lose my mind down there in Antarctica. I hope every word the entity told me was hallucination and delusion. But I don't think it was, because I can still feel it sometimes. Late at night when everything is quiet, that presence in the back of my mind. Distant now, faint, but there, watching, waiting. And sometimes, very rarely, I hear words, not full sentences, just fragments. Soon, they wake. Forgive me. It knows I'm telling people. It knows I'm breaking my silence. And I think, in some way, it's grateful, because we were both abandoned, both left behind by the same absent God, both trying to warn a world that doesn't want to listen. So here's my final message. If this video disappears tomorrow, if my account gets deleted, if I stop posting, you'll know why. They found me. They silenced me. And you can decide for yourself what that means. But if things start getting really weird in the world, when the earthquakes get stronger and the storms get worse and scientists start running out of explanations, remember what I told you. Remember that someone tried to warn you, that someone saw what was buried beneath the ice and lived to tell about it. God isn't coming to save us. He left a long time ago, 2,000 years of prayers into silence. And the things he left behind to watch over us, they've gone insane from abandonment. They're waking up. They're angry. And they have no reason left to show us mercy. Good luck. We're all going to need it.